Welcome to episode 4 of the Figure Feedback Podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about what features I would love to see become standard on Resin 3D printers going forward in order to make the hobby more approachable for new people and to just make it easier in general for everyone. I got a few different things I want to talk about there, but before I get into that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping for some of the things going on this channel so far. So there's been a couple of videos released since the last podcast episode, and I have just been knocking out a lot of different resin reviews. So I'm fortunate enough to have some companies ask me if I would like to test out their resin, and I'm more than happy to give it a shot. So the first one is going to be for Creete's ceramic statue resin. This is the third resin that I tried from this particular brand, so that video is now up. I'll leave a link in the card so that you can check that out if you're curious about it. And then the other resin that I tried out since then has been the Conjure rigid resin, and Conjure is a resin from Chi2 Systems. It's one that they sell on their website, and I tried that one out, and that one is really meant for more functional parts for resin 3D printing. So instead of just statues and miniatures and stuff like that, which you can still use it for that, but this particular resin was geared towards things that move, that go together, and the stuff that you work with and not just regular statues and stuff. So if you're curious about a functional resin that you can use, check out that video as well. I do have some other resin reviews coming up. One of them is going to be from Nova 3D for their water washable mecha resin. And that is going to be interesting, I think, because it's water washable, but at the same time, it's tough. And it just sort of goes against the way of thinking when it comes to water washable resins, because the idea is it's brittle. But this is not supposed to be brittle, but it's also supposed to be water washable. I haven't tried it as of this recording, but I'm going to soon, so I'll be really curious about those results. And then also Creete just released their matte resins. So these are resins that are supposed to leave a completely, matte finish on your models. It's not supposed to shine in the light when you get it at a certain angle. So they sent me over a few of those, and I'll be trying that out as well in the future. So you can look forward to that if you're interested. All right, so I got some notes here about resin 3D printing features that I would like to see happen in the future if it's possible. So the first thing that I have on my list is harmless resin. That has to be number one. Now, as of right now, unless you're getting something like dental resin, these types of things that just cost a lot of money. I'm talking about resins that you can really just use affordably in the comfort of your own home, much like how we do now. And I need for that resin to be non-toxic, completely harmless, something that you can spill on your hands, something that you could use without gloves if you want to. Because the harmful nature of resin is one of the biggest things that I believe puts people off from trying this, either because they don't want to deal with it because they're afraid, or they would like to, but they just don't have a space that's suitable for working with that kind of thing. It's always ideal, if you're going to be resin 3D printing, to do it in an area away from your common living space. So that means try not to do it in your bedroom, in your living room, in your kitchen, in your bathroom, even if it's a closet in your bedroom. It's just the fumes. The jury is still out with a lot of the long-term effects of being constantly near the fumes that's produced by resin, and whether or not it can actually have any kind of profound effect on you going forward. So until we kind of learn a lot more about that, I think that is best if we just take precautions and kind of just stay as far away as we can when we can. And that means not printing in a space where you're always going to be and you're always going to be breathing that air. I'm fortunate enough to have a garage where I can do that. And some people produce ventilation options in order to keep the air more purified in their space. And if you're able to do that, then, that's absolutely fantastic. But in order to alleviate all of that, the resin just needs to be harmless. If there's some way that someone somewhere is able to develop a liquid that reacts just like UV resin does, gives you the same type of quality that using a UV resin does, but is still completely harmless, it would be a complete game changer. by far. Now, when it comes to just regular types of epoxy resins that people use to do crafting projects with, where you mix in a resin and a hardener and then it just solidifies over time, there is an alternative to that. And I did a review on it, and it's called Resin Creete. And Resin Creete is completely harmless to like your hands, and it works similar to how resin does. It just mixes with water and then it solidifies over time. You know, it still gets warm as it's curing, just like resin does, but it's not harmful to you. But the other thing about Resin Crete is that it's also limited in its color because it's a powder. When you mix it with water, it becomes white and opaque. The great thing about regular resin that you mix with hardener is that it's clear. So you're able to more easily add different colors to it, and you'll be able to still have a nice sort of transparent finish where you can't really do that with Resin Crete, and that's one of the biggest downsides of it. But if we could have something kind of along those lines, but have it work in 3D printers, I mean, it would just be amazing. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't know exactly what one has to do to achieve that, but I do know this, just as a regular citizen of planet Earth, we can do it. We absolutely can do it. Because every time I see a problem like this that can be fixed with science, I immediately start thinking about space. I think about the moon and how we went there decades ago. And then I think about like the Mars rover. And I remember sitting in my living room in Indiana looking at that Mars rover as it was descending into Mars, onto Mars, live streamed from NASA. And we're all just we're looking at this small vehicle size thing that they hurled through space and they sent it all the way to another planet. It didn't run into anything along the way. It didn't get knocked off course. It's like they just threw a basketball across space and then just landed nothing but net right there on the surface. And I remember watching that parachute get flying off of the rover as the rover was landing down. It was a really amazing moment. And I think if we can do that and have it to be live streamed, come on, we can come up with a resin that's not poisonous. You know, it may be kind of expensive to get there, but it is entirely possible. And once that happens, then I think all restraints are off. This is definitely something that you'll be able to just have in stores, regular stores, and when you don't have to worry about people having allergic reactions and burning their faces off because they're not handling this stuff responsibly, then this hobby is going to boom. So that's the first thing, harmless resin. So the second thing is something that already exists, but I think it needs to be standard, and that's flexible build plates, a flexible thing that goes on the metal build plate. Because right now, when you have a print, you have to scrape it off with that metal scraper with resin 3D printing. But when it comes to FDM, they tend to give you scrapers in the box, but I never use it because those beds usually have a flexible sheet on top of them. So when you're finished printing, you just take the sheet off, you give it a flex, and then it pops right off. There's really no need to use a plastic scraper on it. And there is a product available that is a flexible sheet that you can put on the build plates of Resin 3D printers and do the same thing. Just pop off those prints when you're done. But it's not standard. And the effectiveness of it, while yeah, it works, I feel like it's still kind of iffy when it comes to the types of printers that you're going to be using it for and whether or not you can use it with your existing build plate even after leveling it. Is it going to affect the consistency of having successful prints? And by and large, I think that it does do a good job. I don't have one myself, but just based on what I've seen. But I think it will help to alleviate any concerns if some of the major printing manufacturers either got together with one of the companies that makes those types of flexible plates for Resin 3D printers and say like, hey, how about we enter into an agreement where we will have you produce those for our printers? We will test them. We will make sure that they work. They're 100% work. They're great. And then we would just sell it as standard for our printers going forward. And I really do think that that needs to happen because it gets really kind of dangerous when you're scraping, especially if you fill up the build plate and you don't have really enough room to really get a good distance when you're trying to scrape those first layers off. And I am one of those people, as I'm sure there are many others, who have had a situation where the blade has slipped and went right into the glove and boom, cut. And that is not fun. Fortunately, like there was no resin on my hand when it happened, but you can imagine it's pretty terrifying when you have uncured resin and you're scraping a plate with it and then it just slices your hand. That was a long time ago, and that's something I'm sure no one ever wants to experience. So instead of kind of risking it and being sort of dangerous like that, we should just be able to flex it right off and just take those metal scrapers and have it be a thing of the past, because I don't think that we should be dealing with that going forward. The next thing, heated vats and or heated chambers for Resin 3D printers. Now, there's already something like this that already exists, but it's not standard, and the printers that they are on may be a little bit more expensive than normal. Having a heated vat or a heated chamber is extremely helpful because when you're living in a colder environment in the colder months, it's going to help to make sure that you don't have failures that's based on temperatures. Because a warm resin is a happy resin, and you will have a higher opportunity, a higher chance of having a successful print when the resin is nice and warm. Usually, when you want to warm up a resin to about 85, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. But as we're in these colder months, if I were to go into my garage right now, my garage temperature is going to be around the 50s. And then inside of the Resin 3D printer, it's also going to have a temperature of around the lower to mid 50s, just the surrounding air. Now, I do have a mini resin heater from Chitu Systems that I've been using, and it's just been working phenomenally well since I hooked it up. It was really easy to hook up. It's really just finding a spot to put it on the printer and making sure that it doesn't get in the way of the build plate as it's going down. But it's also on this ball joint, so you're able to move the heater around front to back, side to side in order to get the correct angle that you want. But it does a really good job of bringing the air in that printer up to temperature and keeping it there for several hours at a time. And I've just had a great experience with it. Now, that thing is only like $50, maybe $60. So it's not a very expensive thing to add to your arsenal. But going forward, I would like for that to be standard, whether it's something that heats the vat or something that just keeps the entire inner workings of the chamber warm, so long as that lid is still on to, keep the heat in. So that'll go a long way to helping out people who live in colder environments who want to resin 3D print. The next point is going to be speed. Speed, speed, and more speed. That's extremely important. We're all kind of impatient, I know. We want to get those prints, especially the larger ones, done as soon as possible. I think that with the latest batches of Resin 3D printers that have come out, there's been a big emphasis on resolution. How many Ks can we get? And I think that part of that is just with marketing, because when you see 8K, 9K, 12K, if you got more Ks, then that means whatever you print is going to look so much better. 8K looks so much better than 4K. 9K is better than 8K. You have 10K, 12K, 14K. And it kind of gets to that point where I'm like, okay, now is this really, really necessary? Are we really seeing that big of a difference between 14K and 12K? Is it really a huge difference between 8K and 12K when it comes to these prints that we're making? I don't think that there really is, especially if the settings that you have in there are pretty spot on. So instead of focusing on the resolution for things that most people aren't going to be able to tell the difference between which K produced which model, I think speed should be the focus. being able to print things a lot more faster. Something that would normally take me, say, 7 hours to print. What if I could print it in about 3.5 or maybe even 4 hours? Especially if it's a large print for a larger printer. Can you imagine being able to print a 1/6 scale statue in just a few hours as a standard? Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I know that that means that using high speed resins may become a necessity because they will flow a lot more easily, becomes more of a water like consistency. And those resins, they could raise the price on those just so you can have the benefit of having the high speed resin. And I get it. Okay. And that's something that I'm willing to do for those results. So for the next batches of printers that come out, instead of trying to win the resolution race, I think that the next thing that manufacturers should be focusing on is who can print things the fastest. Sort of like the Bamboo Labs approach to 3D printing and how they changed the game for a lot of these companies making FDM printers because they came out with a really fast, accurate printer. And then as soon as that really caught fire, not literally, but as far as popularity goes, then everyone who comes out with a printer, they're saying 500 millimeters per second. That's how fast. Acceleration rate 100 million. You know what I mean. So that's what we should be doing moving forward. Increase the speed of these Resin 3D printers so that someone can print an entire freaking Warhammer army if they want, or just some other tabletop game. Maybe it's not Warhammer for legal reasons. And they'll be able to do that in an hour and a half, an entire plate of like 20 miniatures printed before halftime of like a basketball game or something. Yeah, that would be awesome. This next point is about making printing in general a lot easier for not only beginners, but also people who don't really care to dig into the intricacies of Resin 3D printing on the software side, as far as slicing and adding supports yourself. I'm thinking of a one-click solution for both exporting to the printer, slicing the model, and adding all necessary supports without any input from you. So you can take a model, any model that you want, and as long as it fits on that build plate, the software will be able to intelligently know this is where I need to put the supports. This is how I need to angle this print for the best possible support structure. And then I'll just send it to the printer, and then that's it. Literally, you click one button and you're done. Now, if you want to do things manually, you probably could get a better result. But I'm looking for mass adoption here. And for mass adoption, you have to make things as easy as possible. You save the more complicated matters for those who want it. But for everyone else, you just simply make it super duper simple. And you can print wirelessly. That's not a new thing, like I said. But having the one-click solution to do everything for you, no matter what you want to print, it'll just make it a lot more approachable. And the last point that I want to make is about brand recognition, because I think 3D printing and Resin 3D printing specifically is still a very niche hobby. And most people do not know about the different brands who make these 3D printers possible. Most people have never heard of Elegoo or Anycubic. They may have heard the name Creality once or twice because of everything that the Ender 3 has done. But in general, most people, they never heard of this. And even the people like me who are the main audience for printing have not heard of this either. So, for example, one of Elegoo's co-founders said in an interview back in September that in their research, the people who purchase their printers, the thing that they do the most is print miniatures and statues and just figures in general. And then right underneath them are the people who use their printers to create more functional objects and use it for prototyping and stuff like that. But when you look at people like me, the folks who are just going to mostly use it to print like figures and stuff, our hobbies tend to be aligned in more than one area. So take gaming, for example. There are a ton of gamers out there who buy collector's editions that have those cool statues in them, and they buy them specifically for those statues a lot of the time. And if you look at their houses and look in their rooms, they probably have something like this going on back there too. And they may not be aware of this kind of a thing. And that's why I thought it was really interesting when Elegoo's co-founder mentioned that they were trying to work out an agreement with Naughty Dog to possibly produce statues or whatnot that they can then use in things like collector's editions for their games. He mentioned The Last of Us specifically, but I thought that that was a really good idea and would go a long way for marketing. Could you imagine that if Elegoo and Naughty Dog, or Elegoo with anybody, or any of these companies, it doesn't have to be Elegoo, were to partner with one of these major video game developers and publishers to create these figures and these statues that goes into these more expensive collector's edition, that will allow them to put things that are recognizable to their brand inside of that box, where you will know that, hey, the company who made this, for example, is Elegoo. Inside of there, they can include a coupon for X amount of dollars off their standard Resin 3D printer to get you started. Like, here's a $30, $40 off Elegoo Mars, something like that. And something that will also let them know that this statue that you love so much, that you bought this collector's edition for, this is the type of machine that it was made on. And you will be able to create not only this, but a whole lot of other cool statues as well. And you use the Elegoo 3D printer to do it. And if that game is really successful, you got a lot of people buying the collector's edition, you're going to open up the door to a lot of folks who didn't even know that they could do this in their homes. And they may just be interested enough to give it a shot. And before you know it, if it's successful, a brand like Elegoo or some other type of a brand will be able to branch off into other companies to create statues for them. And then, hey man, it just starts to spread. And once it starts to spread like that, and then you have the gaming public more interested in this, and then it starts to spread out from there, and then we get to become more of a mass market juggernaut, so to speak. So marketing is extremely important when it comes to this. Instead of just kind of keeping it to ourselves, it needs to branch out, and collaborating with more mainstream pop culture brands, if you will, especially video game companies, will go a long way to making that happen. So that is it. Those are just a few of my thoughts on the future of resin 3D printing and what I think needs to happen in order for it to really just take off and just shoot off like a rocket straight to the moon. I think that everything that I said here is very much doable. And the hardest thing is just going to be the harmless resin. That might be what takes the longest to do, but it is possible. But even if we have to wait a lot longer for that, everything else that I mentioned, I think can be done within a very reasonable amount of time. And it can also go a long way into making resin 3D printing a hobby that a lot more people will know about, and thus a lot more people can enjoy. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Figure Feedback Podcast. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this, and I'll be back with another one very soon. So until then, take care of yourselves. I'll talk to you soon.